She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't actually need a private cabin. You're just one person. My son needs the space." That was the moment I knew this was either going to end quietly or it was going to get very interesting very fast. Let me set the scene. Friday evening, late November, the 6:47 p.m. Cascade Rail overnight train from Portland to Vancouver. I've been taking this exact route 4 times a year for the past 3 years. Always the same train, always the same cabin. Cabin 7, lower deck, starboard side. Private sleeper, single occupancy. I book it months in advance because it fills up fast and I know from experience what happens when you wait. My name is Marcus. I'm 38. I work as a rail safety compliance officer for a regional transportation authority. What that means practically is that I spend a significant chunk of my professional life on trains. I know the staff by name. I know conductors, service managers, the people who handle complaints. And I know the rules. Not just the informal customer service stuff, but the actual federal and state-level regulations around passenger rights, ticketing, and reserved accommodations. I also have a chronic back condition I've been managing for 6 years. 3 herniated discs, lower lumbar. The reason I always book the private sleeper isn't just about comfort. The flatbed with the adjustable rail support is medically necessary for me on overnight journeys. I have documentation for this. My orthopedic specialist, Dr. Priya Nair, has written it out formally. I carry a copy in my laptop bag every single time I travel, because I've learned the hard way that being prepared matters. So, Friday evening. The train left Portland Union Station exactly on time at 6:47. I was already settled into cabin 7. I'd changed into comfortable clothes, sweatpants, a zip-up hoodie, because a 5-hour overnight train is not the time for business attire. My lumbar pillow from home was wedged against the wall, laptop open on the fold-down table, thermos of coffee I'd brought from home, bag of trail mix from the station newsstand. I was working through a compliance report I needed to finish before a Monday morning meeting. The cabin door was closed, but not locked. You knock, I'd hear it. At 7:22 p.m., someone knocked. I figured it was the service attendant doing the first rounds. They usually check in around that time to confirm meal preferences and see if you need the bed made down. I called out, "Come in." The door opened. It was not the service attendant. It was a woman I'd never seen before, late 30s, maybe early 40s. She had the kind of expression that said she'd already decided how this conversation was going to go. Behind her in the corridor was a kid, a boy, maybe 9 or 10, holding a tablet with headphones around his neck, looking completely unbothered. She stepped into the doorway and looked around my cabin like she was taking stock of it. Then she looked at me. "Hi," she said. "So this cabin is bigger than ours, and we're going to need you to switch." Not a question, not an excuse me, not a sorry to bother you. A flat statement of what was about to happen, according to her. I took my hands off the keyboard. "I'm sorry?" "My son needs more room," she said. "He gets claustrophobic. Our cabin is too small for him. This one is bigger, and you're just one person, so you don't need all this space. We'll switch." I want to be clear about something. She was not confused. She wasn't in the wrong cabin by accident. She knew exactly where she was and what she was asking for. She just wanted it. I said, "I appreciate you explaining, but I'm not going to switch. This is my reserved cabin. I booked it months ago." She tilted her head slightly. "It's for a child." "I understand," I said. "The answer is still no. I hope your son has a comfortable trip." And I went back to my laptop. She didn't move. "You're being incredibly selfish," she said. "He's 10 years old. He has anxiety. You're one adult who can sleep anywhere." I didn't look up. I can't, actually. But regardless, I've paid for this cabin, and I'm not giving it up. You're welcome to speak to the service attendant if you'd like help with your accommodations. She stood there for another 5 seconds. Then she left and closed the door. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. About 20 minutes later, at roughly 7:45, I heard her voice in the corridor. Loud. She wasn't trying to be discreet. She was talking to another passenger. I could hear the low register of someone responding, someone who sounded uncomfortable. And she was saying things like, "Some people just don't have any empathy," and "What kind of person refuses to help a child?" I kept working. At 7:58, she knocked again, harder this time. I opened the door. She'd collected reinforcements. A man was standing next to her, heavyset, wearing a fleece vest, arms crossed. Her husband. He had the look of someone who knew this was going sideways, but wasn't going to say so. Behind them, 2 passengers were standing in the corridor, an older couple, probably in their 60s, watching with the specific expression of people who haven't decided what they think yet. She pointed at me. My husband talked to people in our car, and they all agree this is unreasonable. You're an adult man traveling alone. You do not need a family-sized cabin. Quick note for anyone who doesn't know trains. The single-occupancy sleeper I'd booked was not a family cabin. It was a standard solo sleeper. She was in a standard 2-person cabin with her son. She wanted mine because it had a slightly wider single bed and a fold-down table. The difference was maybe 18 inches of width. That was it. I looked at the husband. He didn't meet my eyes. I understand you've been talking to other passengers, I said. That doesn't change anything. This is my reserved cabin. I'm not switching. The woman's voice went up a register. What is wrong with you? The older man from the couple in the corridor, gray-haired, wire-rimmed glasses, spoke up. Ma'am, if the cabin is his, it's his. She turned on him. I wasn't talking to you. He held up his hands and stepped back. His wife grabbed his arm. Then she turned back to me. I'm going to get a staff member, she said, and you're going to be embarrassed. Please do get a staff member, I said. I'd actually appreciate that. I closed the door again. At 8:09, there was a knock. This time, it was a service attendant. Young woman. Maybe 25, name tag, said Deja. She looked stressed in the way people look when a passenger has told them something is a crisis and they've had to triage it. Mr. Tillman? She checked her tablet. Hi. I'm so sorry to bother you. We have a passenger concern? I opened the door wider and gestured for her to come in. She stayed in the doorway. Is there any possibility, she said, and I could tell she was choosing her words carefully, of switching to another available cabin? Are there other available cabins? I asked. She hesitated. There are 2 unoccupied cabins on the upper deck. They're technically the same class as your booking. Same class, I said, so not equivalent to this one. Another hesitation. The configuration is a bit different. Different how? She said, quietly. They don't have the adjustable bed rail. There it was. The adjustable bed rail is a specific feature of certain lower deck sleepers on that train line. It's listed in the booking system under accessibility accommodations. Not a luxury upgrade. A medical accommodation feature. My reservation was specifically coded for it. I said, Deja, I want you to understand, I'm not saying this to be difficult. I have a documented spinal condition. I booked this cabin specifically because of the adjustable rail. I have a letter from my orthopedic specialist in my bag if you need to see it. I cannot sleep on a standard flat sleeper without significant pain. So I can't switch, and I don't think Cascade Rail would want me to, given that the medical accommodation is part of my booking record. Deja looked at her tablet for a long moment. Then she looked up. Your booking does have the medical flag on it. Yes, I said. It does. Let me go speak with the passenger, she said. I'm sorry for the interruption. Thank you. You're doing your job exactly right. She gave me a grateful look and left. For about 15 minutes, I heard muffled conversation from further down the corridor. Then the woman's voice got loud again. Not shouting yet, but the kind of loud that's a warning shot. I heard the word manager. I heard the word discrimination. Something that might have been report. I finished my compliance report, saved it, closed my laptop. At 8:31, the knock was much harder. 3 sharp raps. I opened the door. It was just her this time. No husband, no Deja, and she was done performing reasonableness. The attendant won't help me, she said. So I'm going to say this directly. I know you can move, you're just choosing not to. And that is disgusting. You're choosing your own comfort over a child's well-being. I've explained the situation to the attendant, I said. She's aware of the circumstances. There's nothing more to discuss. You think because you paid for this cabin you can just ignore everyone around you? That is not how decent human beings behave. The older couple was in the corridor again. A few other faces too. People drawn by the noise. The husband was hovering at the far end of the corridor, watching but not approaching. I kept my voice completely level. I've explained my situation. The staff are aware. I'm going to ask you one time to stop knocking on my door. She took a step forward. Into the cabin. Uninvited. And then she made her fatal mistake. She grabbed my arm. Just for a second. A hard grab on my forearm. The way people do when they're trying to physically emphasize a point. You need to listen to me, she said. I went very still. Remove your hand, I said. She dropped it. But the damage was done. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. That was physical contact. Uninvited, forceful physical contact on a common carrier. That's not just rude. That's a specific violation with specific consequences. I stepped out into the corridor. I looked at the people watching, the older couple, 3 or 4 other passengers. I made eye contact with the gray-haired man who'd spoken up earlier. He gave me a small nod. Then I looked at her. "You just made physical contact with me without my consent," I said, in front of witnesses, on a federally regulated train. I want you to understand that before we continue. She blinked. She hadn't expected that. I just touched your arm. "You grabbed me," I said. "That's the accurate description." "Oh, come on. You're being dramatic." "I need you to stay here," I said. "I'm going to get the service manager." I walked down the corridor to the service station. Deja was there, along with a man I recognized, Gerald Park, the senior service manager on this specific Cascade Rail route. I had interacted with Gerald a number of times over 3 years. Not close friends, but the kind of professional acquaintance where you know each other's names and you've had real conversations. "Gerald," I said. He looked up. "Mr. Tillman, I heard there's been a situation." "It's escalated," I said. "The passenger just made uninvited physical contact with me in my cabin. I want to make a formal report." Gerald straightened up immediately. His whole manner shifted. "She touched you?" "Grabbed my forearm. Multiple witnesses in the corridor." He looked at Deja. She nodded once, confirming that yes, there were people out there who had seen it. Gerald said, "Let's go." We walked back. The woman was still in the corridor. So were the witnesses. Her husband had finally shown up too. Gerald introduced himself as the service manager and told the woman calmly and professionally that he needed to speak with her about the reported contact. She went straight to it. "I barely touched him. This is completely blown out of proportion. I'm trying to advocate for my child, and this man has been dismissive and rude this entire time." Gerald said, "Ma'am, I understand you've had a frustrating evening. The gentleman's cabin booking is valid. It includes a medical accommodation notation, and physical contact with another passenger is not acceptable. I need you to return to your cabin." "He should be in a different cabin," she said. "He's alone. We're a family." Gerald looked at me. I could see him making a decision about how much to say. I helped him out. "Gerald, should I tell her, or would you like to?" He gestured for me to go ahead. I looked at her. No drama, no satisfaction in my voice. Just the facts. "My name is Marcus Tillman," I said. "I'm a rail safety compliance officer. I work with regional transportation authorities on passenger rights, accommodation standards, and regulatory compliance. I know federal rail regulations probably better than anyone else on this train. I've taken this route 4 times a year for 3 years. I know Gerald, and I know Deja, and I know most of the crew on this line by name." I paused for 1 second. "When you grabbed my arm, you committed what qualifies as physical harassment under Cascade Rail's passenger conduct policy and potentially under state statute, depending on how this gets characterized in a formal report. A report which I will be filing tonight. Every interaction we've had, beginning with your first demand at 7:22 p.m., has been consistent with a pattern of harassment toward a passenger with a documented medical accommodation." She stared at me. "I'm also," I said, "familiar with the process by which passengers can be removed from trains at intermediate stops." Silence in the corridor. The gray-haired man said, clearly, and without hesitation I saw her grab him. "I'll say so if anyone needs to write it down." His wife nodded. 2 other passengers said similar things. The woman near the end of the corridor said, "I saw it too." She stepped into his room and grabbed his arm. The husband's face had gone the color of old chalk. The woman, for the first time since she'd knocked on my door, had nothing to say. Gerald stepped in. He was completely professional. He told her that Cascade Rail took passenger safety seriously, that physical contact between passengers was treated as a serious matter, and that given the number of witnesses and the documentation on my booking, he was filing an incident report. He told her that if she returned to her cabin and had no further contact with me for the remainder of the trip, that would be noted as cooperative behavior. The other option was railway police meeting the train at the next stop. She chose the cabin. She walked down that corridor without looking at anyone. Her husband followed. He paused for exactly 1 second near me and looked like he was going to say something. Then he didn't. He just walked. I went back to cabin 7. Deja closed the door behind me and apologized again. I told her she had nothing to apologize for, and that she'd handled everything exactly right. At 9:15, Gerald knocked and came in. He sat in the fold-out chair and we talked for about 20 minutes. He took a formal statement from me. He confirmed that 2 other passengers had already given him written statements about witnessing the physical contact. He also told me, and I appreciated the transparency, that before he and I had walked back to that corridor together, the woman had told him I had refused to accommodate a disabled child. I asked if her son had a documented disability requiring specific accommodations. Gerald said no documentation, no notation on her booking, just her word. She said that to you? I asked. She did, he said. I made a note of that in the statement. Making a false claim to railroad staff about a disability accommodation is not a nothing thing. It's the kind of claim that gets reviewed when incident reports go up the chain. Gerald also told me that the woman had left a complaint in the Cascade Rail app at 8:15 p.m. before the corridor confrontation, claiming that a male passenger had refused to yield a family accommodation cabin and had been hostile and threatening. She had apparently filed this on her phone while Deja was still talking to me. I asked Gerald to make sure the timestamp on my incident report was accurate. He said it would be. He also confirmed, almost as an aside, that there is no formal Cascade Rail policy requiring solo passengers to yield cabins to families. There never has been. What she'd been telling people, that she was entitled to my cabin because of her kid, she invented that from scratch. Gerald, I said, I know. But she didn't. He smiled a little at that. No, he said, she did not. Before he left, Gerald told me that as a gesture of goodwill for the disruption, Cascade Rail was comping my cabin fee for the journey. Full refund. He also offered a voucher for a future trip. I said it wasn't necessary, but I took the voucher. I'm not a saint. I slept well. The adjustable rail did its job. My back felt fine in the morning. Now here's where it gets a little extra. About 2 days after I got home, a review appeared on the Cascade Rail customer feedback page. I knew it was her because the username was something like Traveling Mom of One, and the review detailed, at length and with significant embellishment, the story of a selfish male passenger who refused to give up his cabin for a child with anxiety, was aggressive and threatening, and how Cascade Rail staff had failed to help her family. She gave Cascade Rail 2 stars. She called the service useless and said staff had sided with an aggressive male passenger over a vulnerable child. I waited 2 days. Then I left my own review. Mine was factual, completely factual, no emotion, no loaded adjectives. I described arriving at my pre-booked medical accommodation cabin. I described a passenger entering my cabin uninvited and demanding I vacate so her son could have more space. I described the escalation, including the uninvited physical contact witnessed by multiple passengers. I described Gerald's professionalism and Deja's handling of the situation. I mentioned that false claims about disability accommodations had been made to staff. I mentioned that I had filed a formal incident report. I gave Cascade Rail 5 stars. I specifically named Gerald and Deja. Completely neutral in tone. I did not identify her. I did not name her. I just said what happened, in order, with times. Within 48 hours, her 2-star review had 16 helpful ratings and about 30 comments from other Cascade Rail customers pushing back on her version of events. Some had clearly read my review. A few mentioned the physical contact details specifically. I don't know what happened to her formal complaint, the one she filed at 8:15 p.m. calling me hostile and threatening. I assume it went into the same incident file as the witness statements. I assume it did not help her case. Cascade Rail's customer relations team responded to my review within 3 days. They thanked me for the detailed account, confirmed the incident had been reviewed internally, and noted that the crew response had been evaluated as compliant with passenger conduct protocols. They also said the matter had been escalated to their passenger rights review office. I don't know exactly what that means for her. I'm not going to pretend I do. What I do know, I have cabin 7 booked again for next March. Reservation already confirmed. Medical accommodation notation is in the system. Gerald will probably be on that route. Deja might be too. My back is fine. The kid, for what it's worth, looked completely fine the whole time. He had his tablet, he had his headphones, he was not visibly distressed. Whatever anxiety his mom was describing, it didn't seem to require an extra 18 inches of sleeping space. It seemed to require his mom to feel like she'd gotten her way. Here's the thing about people like her. They do this because it usually works. They find one adult who's tired or conflict-averse or just doesn't want the trouble, and that person folds and they walk away having confirmed to themselves that all it takes is enough pressure and the right invocation of a kid's needs. She's probably done it on planes, in parking lots, at restaurants. She's gotten upgrades and priority and accommodations she had no right to, over and over, because most people would rather give up the thing than deal with the noise. She picked me, and I was not that person. I don't say that with pride, I say it because the stakes were real. My medical accommodation wasn't a preference. It wasn't me being stubborn. It was something I needed, that I had properly documented and properly booked, that she wanted to take from me, because her default setting was that she deserved it more. The reveal wasn't some dramatic moment where I threw my credentials in her face right at the start. I waited until it mattered, until she'd grabbed me, crossed a clear line, and there were witnesses standing in that corridor. Then I said who I was and what I knew, and what was going to happen next. Calm. Factual. And that was enough. She walked out of that corridor with nothing. I fell asleep an hour later with the adjustable rail doing exactly what it's supposed to do. That was 4 months ago. I've taken the train twice since then. Both times uneventful. Both times cabin 7. I have started bringing slightly better trail mix from the station. So what would you have done? Would you have switched cabins just to make the noise stop? I'm genuinely curious, because I think a lot of people would have, and I honestly don't blame them for it. Tell me in the comments.